You have written a new book.
I have,
and it's called Back to Ayodhya. Did I say buck?
Back.
There's a level of analytical insight in the book that I personally haven't seen in the current modern Hindu landscape at all. What were you thinking about when you made this analysis, when you wrote this? What have you seen?
So I hope what I've done is when I've written Avatars of the Master, even Hypocrite Within, and Ramayana, is I want to make sure that the reader walks away with the idea that Ramayana is happening right now.
I mean, you're famous somehow for doing this. You always point out the cosmic consequences to everything.
Yes, yeah.
And I think it's a good point.
I look at Hanuman. When I was writing it, I just felt so pumped.
There are everyday interactions and conversations when somebody looks at them and says, so you actually believe there was this giant figure that was sleeping for 6 months of the year, right? That rose up and had to fight this, blue-skinned god.
Yeah.
It's not a convenient conversation to have in that moment because you're confronted with something that most likely is going to make you look silly in front of the person. Jai Gurudev, Mayuran.
Jai Gurudev.
Welcome back. So we have another episode together. You have written a new book.
I have,
and it's called Back to Ayodhya. Did I say buck?
Back
to Ayodhya.
Yeah.
So tell me about it. Why did you do it? What's the purpose behind it?
Back to Ayodhya. I wrote Avatars of the Master, which was the first book I wrote, and it was going through the avatars from Matsya, Kurma, Mohini, Varaha, Narasimha, Vamana, and I narrate the Leelas, as in the Bhagavatam, and then draw out the spiritual lessons, but through the lens of the Master. This is what it is. Avatars of the Master. So our experience of our spiritual path, the lessons that Guruji has given us, the trials, the tribulations, the successes, the joys, all of that together mapped out upon the Leelas of the Bhagavatam. And I've done the same thing with the Ramayana. So the Leelas are there, but in the way I've written it and the way I would like, I hope the reader takes from it, is that these Leelas are very much happening here and now. And for us in particular, it is made apparent and made tangible through Guruji, through the Master, as I describe in the book.
What was the feedback you got from the first one, Avatars of the Master?
It was good, I hope. On the whole, no one said anything negative. No, I think it's just this marrying of the so-called mundane living reality that we all have and do on a day. Go to work, you're a dentist, you're a Swami, do nominal, same old stuff, with the kind of poetic and flamboyancy and the amazing depth and profundity of the Bhagavatam, of the Ramayana and so on, and marrying those two realities together to understand that there is a Leela unfolding in the mundaneness of our life. And I think that's what I really want to do, because sometimes when we do metaphorical writing, we treat the Ramayana like a banana. So you just basically, or banana skin, I would say. You got the banana skin, you peel it off and you throw it away. So you take the Ramayana, get the spiritual lessons, and you throw away the actual narrative of the Ramayana. I hope what I've done is when I've written Avatars of the Master, even Hypocrite Within, and Ramayana, is I want to make sure that the reader walks away with the idea that Ramayana is happening right now. And that's the key thing as well.
Yeah, I mean, having read the book, this new one, Back to Ayodhya, it's definitely, I think it definitely achieves that. First of all, I think it definitely achieves that. And I think there's a level of analytical insight in the book that I personally haven't seen in the current modern Hindu landscape at all. I think a lot of people contend with these religious narratives as being exactly what you said. Either we draw some lesson from it, or we tell the stories, but we leave it almost to the religious domain. So you have your temple time and sadhana time, and then you go there and then you sort of participate in this circumstantially. And then maybe some devotional mood and whatever else that comes from it. But what you're doing, as you said, marrying that narrative to real life, to character traits, to almost psychology, it feels. Breaking down the human psyche, breaking down our habits, tendencies, whatever it may be. And it really feels like a living thing.
Yeah, the key point to mention is that and this is stuff that, Rajiv Malhotra and other, Hindu intellectuals have kind of brought up, is that the Abrahamic traditions work on their narratives because, as we've talked about, they're a salvation theology. most of the time. Not all the time, most of the time. So Christianity and Islam in particular, if Christ didn't die on the cross, then your ability to be saved is, becomes redundant. If the Quran wasn't given to Muhammad and in a historical, factual sense, then you're not a believer. The concept of Islam and going to heaven and avoiding hell is redundant as well. So that's the Abrahamic thing. Because of exclusivity of truth, the narrative becomes historical. The historical element of the narrative becomes absolutely fundamental. These things must have happened for these stories to be relevant at all.
Yep.
However, when you come to the Dharmic traditions, especially the Bhakti traditions, it's about relationship. It's about transformation of consciousness. So it's really about whatever you can throw into the mix to elevate your consciousness and intensify your relationship with Sri Hari, with God, just go with it. So what we have in the itihasa literally means that which happened. It is these are historical scriptures. But at the same time, they're embellished history. So what we have is a historical element of the Ramayana. I don't want to dismiss that. It did happen.
Yep.
To what extent, is debatable. There is a metaphorical element to the Ramayana where you can draw lessons, and I've obviously done that in the book. But there's also a Leela element, which is that this Ramayana is not only historical or metaphorical, it is a reality that is constantly playing out all the time. And what the saints, sadhus, acharyas have done is, without distinction, have just brought them all together and amalgamated and merged them all together, historical, metaphorical, and Leela, all together. Because whatever works, right? The main thing is we transform our consciousness and we deepen our relationship with God. We're not stuck in this situation where, if this isn't historical, then I'm not a Hindu and I'm going to go to hell. Those kind of issues don't arise in the Dharmic traditions.
Very true. And I think it is one of the stickiest points between the Dharma traditions and sort of Abrahamic faiths. You have this idea of historicity and did things factually happen or not? Because as you said, their entire faith is predicated on these ideas. It has to have happened. Otherwise, there is nothing to talk about. I want to quote you. So in the book, you talking about this exact subject, you say that these leelas of the Ramayana that you're dissecting, they are eternal realities which are perpetually going on and operate at a transcendent level. What do you mean by transcendent level?
So if the closer we come to God, the more apparent the Leela becomes. So the further away from God, then, if we're just saying we're divorced from a relationship with God, then I'm just going to work on a Monday morning. I'm just looking after my kids. I'm just doing this. I'm just doing that. Everything is mundane. The closer we get to God, the deeper our relationship is, the more a transcendent fragrance starts to permeate our life, and we start to see that our life is not mundane. We are literally, quite literally living with God. And the saints that Guruji often speaks about, they are doing this. They are the exemplars of this situation. So what we are striving to do as bhaktas on this path, as devotees on this path, is we are trying to lift, not bring down so much, but lift up our reality to the level of Leela. And that's what I'm trying to do with this book as well.
It's a nice way of putting it. I think often, how do I put this? I think often one of the struggles I've seen in the wider religious world is that it's the failure to realize that they are living side by side with the divine, with God, and to have that become part of their reality. And many efforts that I've seen of people doing that often come across as very ungrounded.
Yeah.
How do you or your approach in this book try to sort of mitigate this ungrounded tendency of elevating ourselves to a sort of transcendent divine platform?
I think because I hope what I try and do is really tackle the nitty-gritty of day-to-day spirituality and the very strong, clear issues that we face, at the same time delving deep into what the convictions of what our heart can offer us, the gems our heart can offer us. So there is this thing, like you said, you go too deep on the conviction of your heart and suddenly you're Sita, reborn. I'm the reincarnation of Sita, and you just go crazy, right? At the same time, if you can temper that with this idea of the very nature of our mind, the way our mind works, our fears, our insecurities, our desires, all our attachments, and you really focus on that to make it really clear that yes, you are human, you are conditioned, but at the same time, this is there as well, and it's striking the balance between the two, and it's walking a tightrope. Because I don't want to go too far this side and neglect what's on offer that Guruji has given us. At the same time, going down here and not being grounded.
I mean, it almost feels like when we're dealing with the mundane things, we have to be reminded of the transcendent. And so we have to focus a bit more on the transcendent. And when we're dealing with the transcendent, we have to be reminded of the mundane. Like, don't lose sight of the nitty-gritty of the flaws and everything else to keep us somehow grounded.
I mean, when we start talking about, especially about, Kumbhakarna, Indrajit, and Ravana, and the nature of the ego, even Shurpanakha, all these, even the nature of the Rakshasas, Vibhishana, and what he has to deal with, all these things, these are typical day-to-day Sangha-related issues that we go through. So I'm being very grounded on that, at the same time not ignoring that there is a transcendent level at play here.
I personally think you have.
I mean, how can we deny that when we're with Guruji in our life, right? And the experiences that we've had. And this is why I'm not shy to go there and be accused of being ungrounded. It's because because you have Guruji there, I feel like what we've experienced over 18 years that I've known Guruji, that I'm on firm ground. I'm on stable ground to do that.
Well, I think if people who have experienced 18 years of transcendence don't speak about it, then who will?
Yeah,
It just seems
that's why I want to go there.
Yeah.
I want to go there.
Sounds good to me. So obviously, the premise of the book is this correlation between the events of the Ramayana and the master and the guru, right? Obviously, that is something that is going to be more understood by people who have a guru, especially a genuine, real guru who is of that transcendent nature, such as ourselves. And I think, what would you say to someone who doesn't have a guru like that, right? And they're trying to understand the framework of the book. They're trying to see, the points you're making.
I still think about 80 to maybe more than 80% of the book is absolutely entirely accessible and relevant to even the person who's not got a spiritual master in their life. There may be, let's say, 15 to 20% that is very particular and peculiar to a spirit, someone who is walking with a guru, with a Satguru, right? The challenges, the things that get evoked, all these things. And I would say to that person who doesn't have that Satguru or that guru is that treat it as an insight into what could be and the potential that's there. See, if you feel like it's not relevant, you can still, I think, appreciate it from a distance. Even when you read things like Autobiography of a Yogi, right? And you see Yogananda, what he went through. I mean, I don't think hardly anybody in the world who's read that book has really had the experiences to Yukteswara and so on. Right. They can't relate. But nonetheless, it's intriguing. They love it.
It's captivating.
It's captivating. So I think the same could be possible here.
I do agree with you. I think you go a step further. As you said, you've had your 18 years. You're going to talk about it. You position Guruji, specifically Paramahamsa Vishwananda, as the lens through which you see God, or the way to which you apprehend God. I mean, I quote you again. You precisely say, "Through him, I believe one can know God."
Yeah,
right?
Because that's why do I trust the Bhagavad Gita? Because of Guruji. Why do I go to the Vedas? Why we made a Siddhanta and Shastra? All these things are through the lens of the master. The master is the one who opens the door and locks the chambers and the treasures of spirituality. So the Ramayana, yes, I knew the Ramayana when I was a kid, but it's only become alive. The Murtis only become alive. The name only becomes alive through the spiritual master, through the Apta. And so that's the reason why I write these books in that way, because I'm trying to be as authentic and true to myself, I guess.
If you were speaking to a Hindu, such as you were, born into this tradition, you know the stories, do you think that the guru is the fundamental piece of the puzzle that makes that story become a lived reality right now?
Yes, is the honest answer. Look, it's not for me to make absolute statements. That there may be people seekers who have experienced things that I just, obviously off the charts and I don't know about, but I fundamentally feel like at least this is the most tangible way that this can be experienced, in my opinion.
I would agree with you, and I think the reason I agree with you is because I follow what you're saying in the sense of also not wanting to make sort of universal statements, absolute statements. But my feeling is that I think a lot of Hindus, the part that they're really missing from the puzzle is the genuine Sadguru, because I don't think anything fully works in Hinduism
Yeah.
without the Sadguru. It works 80% of the way. I don't think it fully works without the living, present, guiding reality standing in front of you. And it's not for nothing that despite Krishna explaining everything he does to Arjuna, he still says to him, and yet go to the spiritual master. He will show you the truth, right? And I do feel like, again, unreservedly so, we should just make that recommendation. It's not an absolute statement, but it's a statement of absolute relevance to our lives, our spiritual lives.
So I bring this up in the book, and we can talk about, I'll jump into like Sita, for example. Janak, King Janak, he has this kind of task, this bar where, you know, whoever has to marry his daughter Sita has to lift Shiva's bow. And obviously it's this huge bow, and it takes, you know, hundreds, perhaps even thousands of men to actually just trawl it across to actually just push it along, because it's so heavy, it's so huge. And, you know, people will be asking Janak, why on earth did you do that? You know, don't you want your daughter married? You know, why did you set the bar so high? It's just ridiculous. And, you know, you can imagine Janak, and I'm just trying to, like, you know, imagine it in my own mind. Janak will be thinking, maybe I should lower the bar. You know, maybe I'll put a smaller bow. Maybe I'll go for Indra's bow. You know, maybe not Shiva's bow is a bit too much. Indra's bow, maybe. You know, try and go for that. And maybe one of the demigods will come, devas will come and lift up the bow. But he says, no, Shiva's bow. It must be Shiva's bow. And what the insights, one of the things I bring up in that is that you are eternal. That's what we're told in the Bhagavad Gita, right? Yeah. And if I'm eternal, and if I'm here to attain eternity, the supreme goal, that Vaikuntha, if I'm here for that, I need somebody who knows that, who embodies that, who can give that. I need a master who can deliver that at will by mere sankalpa alone. I cannot, me personally, and I respect all traditions and everyone has their way, but me personally, I always had the feeling I must find the master who knows, who embodies, who is literally the personification of that goal, right? And that's what Janak does. He says, no, the bar is here and I will not compromise. And he waits and he waits and he waits. And I think a bhakta in their heart, when they understand what's at stake on their spiritual path, will not compromise. They will not compromise.
I think that's a very profound point, because it translates to so many things in our lives. It's not just a selection of a guru or, you know, but waiting for something because you don't want to lower the bar. I think too many people, it's not that they necessarily lower the bar, it's that they settle for what's convenient. They settle for what's available. They did originally set the bar high because they know intuitively that's the right thing to do. But you do see a lot of people settling. Settling is a big problem in spiritual life. And I feel like when too many people settle, you start to degrade the tattvas, you start to degrade the conditions of these things. We discussed this previously about gurus when we discussed the Siddhanta that we wrote. And I think it's true also of God, not only of gurus. Like, God starts to become a cheaper thing. The Ramayana, take the Ramayana, for example, take Mahabharata, take Itihasa. The number of Hindus that you meet who speak of it as just pure metaphor, it's just mythology, it's just metaphor, it's just this, that, and the other. And the reason that they have lowered that bar is because they don't feel comfortable with the inconvenient truth, because it's not convenient to their everyday interactions and conversations. When somebody looks at them and says, so you actually believe there was this giant figure that was sleeping for 6 months of the year, right? That rose up and had to fight this, you know, blue-skinned god. Yeah. It's not a convenient conversation to have in that moment, because you're confronted with something that most likely is going to make you look silly in front of the person. Right? And so the easy cop-out is, well, it's just mythology. Yeah. And I think too many times this pull towards, yes, of course, it has multiple layers to it. One layer is of course, you know, image protection, reputation, all of these sorts of things. But in general, I just feel like the call to convenience and availability, just what's available to us and what's convenient to us, is one of the biggest problems that we have in spiritual life.
I don't know if I brought this up in the previous podcast about Vivekananda, right?
I don't think you did.
Did I not?
No,
I can't remember. Well, Vivekananda, he had this constant yearning to basically say, I want to know somebody who knows God. And he went around asking everybody, have you seen God? Have you seen God? And everyone was quoting Shastra. Everyone was on there with their big, you know, whatever, Bhagavatam or something like that. And they were just, you know, giving kata or whatever. And he's asking, have you seen God though? And like, no, I haven't. And that's the question. And then eventually goes to Ramakrishna, and he says to Ramakrishna, have you seen God? He said, yes, I see him more clearly than I see you now. Right? And suddenly that's intriguing, but somehow he's incredibly skeptical. He's an ultra-rational personality. And then Ramakrishna eventually takes him to a room, touches him with his foot,
You did mention it, yeah.
Yeah, and then the whole of his reality disappears, right? And then that is the first, let's call it initiation, where Narendra at that time, or Vivekananda, start to realize he knows, right? And that's what makes him follow. And for me personally, that was what it was like with Guruji. It was the constant assessment of, does he really know? Does he really know? And he took me on a journey, really kind of, threw me this way, that way. When I first met him, he was giving me, he was trying to play the role of someone who didn't know at all, and in fact was completely clueless, and which even antagonized me even more. And then he somehow made me realize and search myself when my heart was speaking so strongly, my mind was in denial of who he was. There was this huge conflict within myself, and it came to a point where I started to realize he knows me more than anybody else. This is home. This is what I've been yearning for, what I've been waiting for. And it's that thing that Janak, when Ram comes and finally picks up that bow of Shiva and breaks the bow, he completely smashes his expectations. He completely floors him. And that's how I would describe the experience of how I met Guruji. It's just that he is somebody who proved to me very early on, he knows all, he sees all, and he is that personality who knows the dharma of my soul, why I'm in this body, and what I have to achieve. And once that becomes firmly established, then there's no going back from that. There's no going back from that. And that's what the marriage of Sita and Ram represents. That you talk about the pratyabhijna, right? This kind of absolute conviction. It's the understanding that I have to follow this personality because he knows the truth of my soul. And the point I'm making in the book is that it's the end of narratives, and it's a constant theme throughout the book, actually, that we constantly build stories. I will follow the guru, the master, because of this reason. I will follow Guruji because he said this one, or he gave me this one experience which shows he knows everything, or he told me this which made me feel good. I will follow Guruji for these reasons. But the pratyabhijna experience is to understand that there are no reasons why I'm following him. It just simply is. I have to follow him by compulsion, by the constitutional nature of who I am. I must follow him. And that's what the marriage of Sita and Ram represents, that we understand the master. We understand that there is no other narrative. It's exclusivity. I must follow him because he's the only one who knows me in truth. He has broken that bow of Shiva, and he has released me to my true spiritual path.
I want to read actually something that you said in the book about that marriage. So you say, this is what the marriage of Sita to Ram brings. It means we will not be moved or distracted. Whatever happens, we are willing to see this through to the end. This final sentiment, that whatever happens, we're willing to see this through to the end. Unpack that for me a little bit. What do you think about the marriage really encapsulates this? Well,
it comes back to the point of if you're going to Guruji for happiness, for thrills, for excitement, for this kind of dynamism, I'm with the Sadguru, whatever. If you're coming to Guruji for these reasons, that's going to run out of steam pretty quick, very quickly, I would say. You're going to hit brick wall after brick wall. Till the end means that you have to come to an absolute fundamental level of what life is all about and who you are, existence itself. You have to understand that I'm just constitutionally meant to be with him. As a leaf is constitutionally meant to be with a tree. There is no reason why a leaf is on a tree. You can't rationalize that. It just is, right? It just is part of the tree. Like that, when you have this deep conviction, which is what the marriage represents, then you are willing to just see it through to the end. You're not following him for some outcome. You're not following him because he's going to do something for you. You're not following him because he's going to give you realization, or he's going to give you the pure love of God, right? Things that we don't really understand. You are just going to follow him because you know that this is what you've been born for.
Yeah, I think it actually contrasts quite nicely everything you were saying now with, I think, another character that you expand upon a lot, which is Sugriva. How he sort of transfers from a more conditional friendship with God, where it is for something.
Yeah.
You are trying to get something from him, and the sort of negative consequences that come from that. As you said, the thrill runs out pretty quick, or once you've achieved what you were there to achieve, you can slip into less positive mindset. So Sugriva, how do you encapsulate Sugriva into this?
So there comes a point, Sugriva, when you're on the spiritual path, Sugriva tests Ram. First of all,
Right. Looks for the proof.
So he's been, for those of you who don't know, he's been sort of kicked out of his kingdom by his brother Vali, misunderstanding, big argument, and Vali's far more powerful than Sugriva.
Takes his kingdom and his wife.
It takes his kingdom and his wife, yeah, and he's now exiled to the forest with a few band of loyal followers, Hanuman included. And then he sees Ram, and he sees that Ram is his ticket out of this situation, and so. But he wants to know. So he basically says to Ram, prove yourself to me, and then he makes him shoot arrows and go through certain trials to prove himself. And so that's like that on the spiritual. First of all, initially, the master, he doesn't need to prove himself, but he mercifully does prove himself. I mean, I was just talking to a devotee just recently, yesterday, in fact, and she was telling me, I just needed to know if those dreams that I had of Guruji were real. And then she was telling me this really nice story of just how Guruji walked up to her in the temple and basically just confirmed all those dreams one by one, and just the experiences she had, just to give her that confidence.
Right.
And that's why I said to her, it's not that Guruji knows everything. It's just whether he chooses to let you know that he knows everything, right?
It's very different,
right? And that's what. We need that at the beginning, right? Because we just need to know that we can trust and that he does know, and this isn't just our mind playing games on us. So that happens with Sugriva. But then at the end of the day, he is using Ram.
Right.
It is a business deal. It's a pact. You get me my kingdom back, and I'll help you find Sita. That's the pact. But you'll find with Sugriva, it morphs into something else. Once he engages with Vali, and the first thing is the agreement is Ram hides in the trees, and then he's going to shoot an arrow from far away and kill Vali. The first time they engage, as people know,
he doesn't do it.
It goes horribly wrong. He gets completely battered, and he runs to Ram, and he says to Ram, "What have you done? Have you betrayed me?" Effectively, you were supposed to shoot the arrow. And this is the thing: we come to Guruji. You're supposed to intervene in my life. My life is supposed to be great. My job and my relationships are supposed to be great. And you suddenly start to realize, no, that's not what the Sadguru is here for. He's not here to make your life a bed of roses. Right? He's not he's not a genie in a lamp that you just rub and just say he's going to manifest all these desires. So then Sugriva goes to Ram, and then Ram gives him the garland. Right? He says, I don't know the difference between you two. You look so similar, Vali and Sugriva. I have no way. That's why I didn't shoot the arrow. That's what Ram tells Sugriva. And he says, here, have this garland so that I can identify you as different to Vali. And here, this is a profound thing where the master is waiting for us to assert ourselves that we can't be like an ordinary person. I'm sorry, we cannot come to the master expecting and with the same samskaras as everybody else, right? There has to be a longing that truly wants what the master has. And then that's what Sugriva receives from Ram, and then Ram shoots the arrow and saves him. And it's another point of Sugriva graduates from a business deal to actually choosing Ram. That garland is a massive initiation. It's actually when you move from a Kanishta basic level adhikari to a much higher level of qualification, where you start to realize, no, I'm above pain. I cannot pursue pain, pleasure, or happiness, cheap happiness. I must pursue Ram itself. That's what that initiation is. And then he has the confidence that Ram will intervene. Not just the faith that Ram is Ram, but the faith that Ram will intervene in his life when it's necessary.
You use the word cheap. I want to highlight that because I think that's the mistake a lot of people like Sugriva make, right? Yes, you need a little bit of proof often in the beginning. And sometimes if you're lucky, God will give it. Yeah. The Guru will give it. And as you build this, you absolutely hit the nail on the head. This idea that you can't come being the same as everyone else or being the same as where you were and expecting instant results, right? You say in the book, the battering that Sugriva receives from Vali is a wake-up call that there is no such thing as instant grace. It requires continuous effort, not one or two isolated acts, right? I think this is such a great point. Fundamentally, so many people who speak to me, who I witness in other religions even, their frustrations with God come from just how cheap they relate to God. They understand their relationship as being, but they don't understand it. They don't see how cheap they're making it. But it's this idea that they're expecting so much for so little. They have done nothing, borderline sometimes. And they expect, as you said, the bed of roses, they expect everything to just be handed to them on a silver platter.
Now, I always say, I don't believe Guruji is giving happiness in the sense of that cheap happiness.
Yeah.
He's giving purpose. He's giving a taste of the transcendent. And that's what Sugriva is getting initiated to when he gets that garland. He's starting to realize, this is no longer a business deal. This is my master. This is God, right? And I must follow him. And what I'll skip forward a bit with Sugriva, but what I find really really interesting is when he gets the kingdom back, right? He's there, he's with his cup of wine, enjoying the women, and then there's pleasures of the palace. He's been starved of all these pleasures, lived a very austere life, and he just indulges. And then Ram, there's a monsoon season, so Ram is waiting till the rains stop. And eventually he's expecting Sugriva to come back to him and say, look, we had a pact, let's get on with this. And then what happens is Ram gets really annoyed, and then he sends Lakshmana, and Lakshmana twangs his bow in the palace, and he says that the gate by which Vali was sentenced to is still open for you, Sugriva, right? The portal for where of how Vali got banished is still open to you, Sugriva. And it's this massive wake up call where Sugriva's he just, you can imagine, he just drops his cup of wine. He's jumps out of bed and he's like, oh my God, I better run. And he apologizes profusely. What that shows is something massive. It's massive. It shows that if you have grace of the Satguru and the presence of the Satguru, you have to get to a certain point by a certain time, right? And this is the difference between, let's say normal, let's call it normal, mundane, mundane, but just normal spirituality without the master, without that grace. You can pick up your Japamala whenever you want, and you put it down whenever you want. You go to the temple whenever you want. You pursue things at your leisure, You go as you want. But when you are under the jurisdiction of the grace and mercy of the master, there is an imperative at your own soul level that you must get up and react, and you must reach a certain point by a certain time. And that's what Lakshmana is. When he bursts into the palace, it's Ram saying no, right? We have to get on now. So the theme that runs through the book is there is a sense of urgency. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you picked up on it, but there is a sense of urgency that we have to get to a certain point by a certain time. That is the very definition of grace. That is actually love. That is actually God, the master, calling us back, and the willingness of our soul longing to be back.
One of the things you say is that grace is tremendous responsibility.
Yeah.
To receive grace is a tremendous responsibility. And I think it captures that what you just said about urgency, because I think a lot of people don't see it that way. They look at grace as, that's the gift I've received, and gifts are to be enjoyed.
Yeah. Yeah.
And simply put, a gift is for me, it's for my pleasure. That's why you give me gifts. But people are not used to looking at it as a gift, as a responsibility. I think parents often understand this. They're gifted a child, but they understand that there comes a lot of responsibility with that, right?
Yeah.
Maybe you're gifted a position in an organization, and the wise person will understand, I've been just given a tremendous amount of responsibility. Yeah, it's not, I may derive some pleasure from the responsibility. There may be some incidental happiness that comes from it, but it isn't, I think, the defining feature of it. I think it's responsibility, and I think it's a wonderful thing to highlight.
But who highlights that best of all is Bharata, right?
Oh.
Right? So Bharata is, he's Ram's exiled to the forest, and Bharata is, Kaikeyi has tried to anoint her son Bharata as the successor to Ram and take the throne. To Dasharat, yes. Yeah. And so Bharata runs to Ram, and because he doesn't want to accept this. For him, Ram is everything, and Ram has to be king. And he runs to Ram with a whole entourage of people ready to just change Ram's mind. I will change Ram's mind. I will get him back into Ayodhya, back on the throne. And he goes there, and he begs and he begs and he begs, but Ram does not yield. Ram does not move. And so what does Bharata do? He does something quite magical, which is that he says, you bless these Padakas. I will take these Padakas upon my head. I will march back to Ayodhya. I will put the Padakas on the throne of Ayodhya, and you will rule. You will still rule, right? Not physically, but those Padakas will rule, and I will serve those Padakas, and I will stay outside of the palace, right? In an austere way, just like you're staying in an austere way in the forest as my brother, as my Lord. I will also emulate what you're doing, and I will serve from that perspective. And this is where you start to realize, look at what he does. I think devotees might be able to relate to this when they say, Guruji's distancing himself. Sort of.
Right.
And as sometimes it has happened throughout the years, Guruji has more or less distanced himself in terms of how much he mingles with devotees in general.
More people, it's just more difficult.
Yeah. And so, but he reached the point where he is able to capitalize on the situation, and he finds a way. He doesn't become a victim or a martyr of the situation. Oh, Ram's not coming back, and that's the end of it.
Like Dasharatha.
Like Dasharatha, yeah. In the end of the good times or whatever it is, he gets the particles and he finds that inner relation. And the most important is, it's not a consolation prize, right? People think, oh, the inner Guruji is a consolation prize. Sometimes people get into that mentality. I know there's one devotee who often used to have a lot of contact with Guruji, and that stopped after a while. Things changed and so on. And there was this kind of stubborn obstinance. No, I'm not going to go within. No, I want the old times back. That kind of thing. Bharat doesn't go into that. He accepts. Eventually, he does accept.
Yeah.
But then it catapults him to a whole new level of relationship. And by the end of it, he's got this kind of sarupya moksha, where he actually takes on the form of Ram. Because of the constant absorption in Ram at a distance, this separation, he actually becomes pervaded by Ram. It is the Siddhanta, as you just said.
Yeah.
He becomes pervaded by Ram, takes on the very nature of Ram himself. And then you mentioned Dasharatha.
Yeah, I think, it's... Actually, I have a story to tell, short story that encapsulates this a little bit. I was in Mauritius with Guruji and another Swami many years ago. And we both assumed that if Guruji goes somewhere, we were at the ashram, and if Guruji drives out to go visit anything, he'll take us both with him because we're close associates and whatever else, right? The feeling was like that. So, as predicted, came around lunchtime, he hopped in a car. He was going to go to visit some place that he hadn't told us. But he acts, something weird is going on. We're not being told to come in the car. We're not being told where he's going. And suddenly he just sort of waves at us and says, okay, I'll see you guys later. And he drives off.
Yeah.
And I'm standing there. I was, 20, in my early 20s at the time. And I said, look at the Swami. And we're both just sort of distraught. What just happened?
Yeah.
He left us behind. Distance, right? He's gone. Rama's gone, right? And the immediate reaction was Dasharatha for both of us, in the sense of just distraught, feeling like, oh, the good times have gone, he left us behind, we're unworthy, it's just not good, it's all rubbish now, and all I'm going to do basically is mope until he gets back, right?
Yeah.
And I think and this is why he was a Swami and I wasn't. He looks at me and he realizes that I'm having the same reaction that he's having. He admits that he had the same reaction.
Yeah.
And so he looks at this and he says, we need to find a way. We need to make some use of this. And so he looks at me and he says, let's take the time while he's away to serve. Let's do something that he wanted done, but he hasn't found the time to. And he wanted to paint the walls of the ashram. There had been some cracks in the paint and he wanted us to paint. So we went there and we started to paint. And then we moved to one of the other rooms and we were just helping out in all these sort of menial tasks that otherwise we wouldn't have done. And Guruji came back some hours later and he got back to the ashram and he basically went directly to where we were. He said, what have you guys been doing? And we said, we've been, helping out, painting this, painting that. And he looked so happy. And he said, like, good job, right? And then later, we had a conversation and he basically said, that he orchestrated that situation on purpose. He wanted to see how we would react. I said, well, for transparency's sake, the reaction was poor.
Yeah.
He said, it doesn't matter. The response to that reaction was great. And I think it really encapsulates this because Dasharatha goes into depression, absolute despondency, right? Ram is gone. What is left?
Well, he becomes a widow of the Guru. And the reason why I say it like that is because you put a picture, a widow puts a picture up of the husband, does a little puja to the picture of the husband because the husband's dead. The husband's finished. It's gone, right? And so that's the definition of the widow, right? That's that kind of archetype, right? And we do the same with the master. When the master's given us so much attention or love, whatever it is, and blessings, and then suddenly you feel like the taps run dry or switched off, and you just go into this state of the Dasharatha mentality. I mean, interesting, in traditional stances, Dasharatha's bath is seen as something very, like a great bath sometimes.
But I also don't agree with that. Yeah, I like your take more.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, people might disagree, but that's the way I've understood it. I compare Dasharatha to Bharata, right? In that sense, Bharata finds a way, and that's the big difference.
And also, not only finds a way. I think one thing is resigning to the reality and just being despondent. The other one is finding the way. The other one is also, I think, having things on your terms versus not, right? So one of the things that you say about Dasharatha is, just as Dasharatha's possessiveness of Ram puts an end to his life, so too our fixation on having the master on our terms halts any development.
Yeah.
So the big distinction there, I think, is not only the distance or the change of circumstances that happens naturally in our relationship with Guru and God, and how you respond to it, which is the first principle as well, but the general mindset that feeds this, which is that there is a feeling that something is now wrong for Dasharatha, that this is not how things are supposed to be, right? Whereas I think that the devotee that we're all trying to be, the Bharata, can't afford to think that way. At least, maybe initially, yes, but you can't hang on to the idea that you know how things are supposed to be.
Yeah.
You've got to remain flexible. Guruji has always been like this with us in Bhakti Marga. Either you're on the train with him or you're not.
Yeah.
And the train's moving. It's going from station to station. It's just speeding along. And if you're stuck in the past, if you're stuck in your own concept of how things have to be, you're going to be left behind.
I've seen this when I travel to some distant countries, and you see that there are some devotees who are stuck in 1997. You know, the Guruji of 1997. And this is another testament to the Sadguru. People value, consistency. The Guru must be consistent. Guruji he's always on the move. He's always on the move. The relationship with the master is always on the move. But here's the point. It is always on the move to taking you closer and closer to him if you're aligned. If you're aligned and willing to stay and willing to adapt as he moves. So we have to keep up with the master. And the mistake that Dasharatha makes is he refuses to keep up with the master. The master, he still wants Ram as his son. He is my son. No, he is your son, yes, but he's God.
Yeah.
And to move that forward, to elevate that situation, Bharata says, he's my brother. Yes, but he's God, and he knows he's God. And he worships him like he's God, right? And that's the difference in Bharata and Dasharatha. It's a massive difference.
I mean, it's a very niche comparison, but I also feel like that's true of people who are family of the Guru. I mean, material family. And we know many of Guruji's family on earth, right? And having spoken to them, I think that's a big challenge for all of them. It's setting aside the expected norms of the family relationship to remember, no, he is my spiritual Guru more so than he is my brother, son, cousin, whatever it may be. But talking about this alignment, the 1997 version, it reminds me then of what we discussed earlier, Sita. Sita eventually, we talked about the marriage, but eventually there's the separation, right? And you characterize the separation of Sita from Rama as distraction, desire, how these things can cause a deviation, a separation of sorts. Unpack that please. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think the way I describe it is Sita, yes, she has the proximity of Ram. And sometimes the mind has a phenomenal ability of desensitizing us to the immensity of what we're receiving. And when you have something for a long time, there is a complacency that comes in. And so as a result of the complacency, the golden deer appears, and everyone knows that means a desire, a distraction of some kind. And the curiosity of that, leads everyone has a certain curiosity, the little desires, similar desire, but sometimes if you feed these desires, they turn into a rigid samskara that can no longer be simply just dismissed or put to one side. It starts to take hold, the roots take hold into your psyche, and then the master has to respond. Or rather, in this case, tragically what happens is Ram leaves. And this is what it's a massive shift, obviously, in the Ramayana, but also in our spiritual path. When we make this mistake of the golden deer, when we take for granted what it is to be on the spiritual path, because we receive so much blessings, because it's so good, because it's so comfortable, we actually then start to look over the fence, and the grass is always greener, and then the mind starts to play, and then off we go down. And Ram the Ram doesn't leave. Ram is sent away effectively, by Sita to get the golden deer. Lakshmana is there looking around saying, look, I don't agree with what's going on here. He susses it out pretty quick. So there is always a part of us that knows this is bad. But once that desire takes hold, sometimes it becomes almost impossible to ignore. And then you need to go through a whole drama to get rid of it. A huge drama in this case to get rid of that desire. And it's quite costly. And that's something that I dive into the book, the costliness of what happens, the separation, the anguish. But through that difficult, very difficult time, tremendous spiritual lessons start to get excavated as well.
I think it's almost inevitable from, almost a study of history and religion and spiritual movements, and then comparing it to our own reality, to become complacent is almost inevitable. I've rarely seen a single person that doesn't on some level become complacent, right? At some point it becomes a little more normal than it was before. If it doesn't become all the way mundane, right? You're just too used to it, and you start to, as you said, get distracted. And you do make a point in the book that there's a threshold you cross. You can have one or two distractions here and there, but okay, they don't grip you necessarily. But if you, as you said, feed it, you can really cross a threshold. And then, okay, separation happens. The master takes a stance. He has to react to this because he has to correct the fault. I think what a lot of people then don't understand is that there is a way back. Yeah. There is a way back from separation, back to togetherness, back to the affection of the master, back to this feeling, right? Could you talk a bit about that, like the way back? Because I think a lot of people, like I said, they will identify themselves with this. They'll identify as, I've gone through this. I've found myself feeling the separation, feeling this loss of something I had more before. Because of my mistakes, because of desires, because of distractions, I can't do anything. That's the past. It's happened already.
Yeah.
But what can I do now to fix this?
There's, first of all, don't look for shortcuts to fixing this, is what I would say. It's a very interesting scene that I talk about, is that Hanuman, when he finds Sita in the grove under the tree, after she's been tormented by the other Rakshasi women and Ravana and so on, in Lanka. And then Hanuman says, look, you can just jump on my back. I'll take you back now. And then Sita says, no, Ram has to come for me, right? That's the way it has to happen. Now, you might just say that's just belligerence, or, you know, why are you digging your heels? Just get on his back and go back home. That's the end of it. But no, she realizes something important here. And this is the thing. If we want to get back to the master and we want a secure relationship with the master, we cannot take shortcuts to that. And we must not want to take shortcuts to that. Security with the master comes when we constantly make sacrifices for the long-term true version of our relationship with him, right? It doesn't come through taking a shortcut. For example, you know, there's been times, just between me and you, when in Guruji's residence, because you go to Guruji's residence, in years gone by, there's been a part of me that said, oh, you know, if I hang around with Swami Revati long enough, yeah, maybe I can get to have dinner with Guruji or something like that. I used to think like that back in the day, right? That's a shortcut.
Yeah.
What I should be doing is I should be sitting in my room praying to him if that's where my desire is, or praying to him to say, or rather allowing him to come, being available, yearning for him and striking that connection, and a mind that is a heart that's longing and a mind that is surrendered, right? So we have this desire to be with him, but he has to come when he desires, on his terms, right? And I remember one time I was doing this thing like following you around or following Guruji around, trying to get his eye or whatever it is, and I got fed up with myself trying to do that because I wasn't being authentic. I was just chasing. Yeah. And I just felt like I'm chasing something in a cheap way. Even if I get it, it will be cheap. And even if I get it, it will never really be mine. It's not authentic. So I went back to my room and I just longed for Guruji there. It just so happened, he came knocking on my door. He opened the door and he asked me to come up with him. He came down to knock on my door to ask me to come up with him. Now, does he do that all the time? No. But it was a window for me to understand that I cannot take shortcuts. Yeah. And Sita understands this as well. And if you don't take shortcuts, that's how you build security. Otherwise, you're constantly chasing. And so once you have to get into that mode, and that is, once you get into that mode of, I'm going to do the tapasya, I understand the mistake, I understand the desires, and I will do whatever it takes to get back to that authentic relationship that is rightfully mine by right. But to claim that right, you need to give yourself.
I think we've started to touch upon some of the dangers. Yeah, we've talked about now the cause of separation, the desires, the distractions. You don't only characterize the devotees of Lord Ram, you also speak about some of the Rakshasas that are obviously involved in the combat. Persons like Indrajit, Kumbhakarna.
Yeah.
There's some really compelling stuff there. When I read the book, I really felt like they were dangerous, those two sections. I was reading them thinking, It says hitting a little too close to home in some of these descriptions. I almost at one point was going to write you and think, Marion, were you thinking of someone when you were writing this section? But it was very good stuff, really very good. And I want to read a couple of parts for you because I want you to sort of expand on them, right? So you talked about purpose before. When it comes to Kumbhakarna, you wrote, the eventual consequence of Kumbhakarna is purposelessness. This is extremely serious and runs the risk of destroying everything. Out of necessity, we might tick the boxes, but only with a dry, empty attitude. Inside, we are quietly quitting. As soon as our work is done, we clock out and run to our cave.
Yeah.
Ooh, there's a lot, and you speak a lot about how we disguise spiritual things. Or rather, we disguise this as spiritual things.
Yeah.
It's painting this beautiful picture of renunciation, of indifference, dispassion, and whatever else to the outside. But in truth, it's just this. It's a loss of purpose. It's a quitting. What were you thinking about when you made this analysis, when you wrote this? What have you seen?
So first of all, we need to really understand laziness is ego. Should I make that point again? Laziness is ego. It's the ego that has physiologically hijacked your system that makes you inactive, right? And Guruji just very recently said, hatred is a strong word, yes? And everyone's like, yes. He goes, one thing I hate is laziness, right? And he said, because it's based on ingratitude for life. You have been born here for a reason. We have all been born here for a purpose, and we have been given energy to live out that purpose. We have been given opportunity to live out that purpose, and laziness is a complete obliteration and denial of that. It's a suppression of that. It's going to God and saying, and just basically, to put it bluntly, just showing fingers and just saying, look, I'm done. I'm not playing your game. And for a bhakta, devotees on the spiritual path to be lazy is an abomination, to put it bluntly. That's a strong word. Right? Because and Guruji was very, very strong on that as well. And what happens is people sometimes, I've seen this, people sometimes say, I can't be bothered, I'm just not interested in, I'm just not interested in this and not interested in that. And they say, you know what? I think I'll become, I'll take sannyas or I'll do this or that. I'm very detached, I'm just very detached from everything. No, it's because you just don't want to do anything. Right?
You're renouncing what you should do as well.
Yeah. And this is the thing, sometimes laziness, laziness is not just about not doing anything. It's about being not aspirational.
Yeah.
Right? People sometimes think, no, I'm very busy. I go to work, look after kids. I do this, I do that, I do that. Right? It's like, yeah, but are you looking to break boundaries? Are you looking to actually galvanize and what's in your heart and your soul, you want to manifest it outside? Are you looking to actually do something that's going to do justice to your relationship, that's going to honor and glorify your master and Sri Hari? Are you going to do that? Are you going to manifest something in your life that is going to that Guruji often says that the world will mourn the day that you leave this earth?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you going to said that?
Yeah. Are you going to leave your mark? If you don't have that, I think there's something seriously wrong. Kumbhakarna represents that demonic quality whereby you become almost a narcissist. You pick up people when you need them, your friends, and you put them down when you don't need them. Sometimes you constantly run on ego and ego and ego. You run from this position to that position, and it all just falls apart. And you start to feel like you know everything because you've seen everything and all this kind of stuff. All this stuff is just a Kumbhakarna saying, yeah, I can't be bothered. And how does Ram deal with Kumbhakarna? Ruthlessly. Ruthlessly is the thing. It's very graphic. He shoots arrows, astras, chops off his arms,
cuts off his limbs,
then eventually decapitates and puts arrows in his mouth and all kinds of stuff, right? The master has to use very harsh lessons, which is another form of love, because it's grace, to make us realize the gratitude of life, the simplicity of just being alive, how grateful we should be, right? How grateful we should be that we are on the spiritual path and not this kind of like dismissive, unconscious attitude. And then when you have that gratitude, you march forward. You think, I have to do something. I have to march forward. I have to achieve something for the sake of my guru. Right? And there is this deep longing to do that. And that's what Kumbhakarna represents, the anti-longing.
Yeah.
When you're devoid of longing.
I can speak from a lot of first-hand experience on many of the things you've been saying, because there is such a fine line to be walked, right? I'll give you two examples. First of all, earlier when I was younger, before I became a Swami, I had a conversation with Guruji. Actually, maybe I had just become a Swami already. And he started to tell me off about something I had done. But it was following the same formula as a previous telling off I'd gotten from him. And so I pretty much uttered exactly word for word that I've seen this before. Like it somehow, you want to almost dismiss the telling off because you're like, I know how this is going to end. Right? And I remember saying that to him, and he just paused and he looked at me with a very grave sort of look and said, if you start to act like you know everything and you don't allow my arrows to hit you anymore, I'm going to have to bring bigger weapons to this fight.
Nuclear.
Yeah. And it was very well said, and it landed. You know, I understood that there was a big danger in that moment. There was a big danger to this mentality that I was adopting. Moving forward now, a few more years, Guruji gave me some instructions. And part of his instructions that he gave me as a Swami was to not be too close to people. Right? In general, to keep some sort of healthy distance. Don't run your life on the basis of friendship, but more on the basis of mutual respect and service and these sorts of things. Not that I can't have friends, but there were certain directions, certain things that you just sort of, to keep a little more isolation, these sorts of things. And I realized that in trying to fulfill that request, that vision for who I should be, there were many moments where I overstepped in the wrong direction, right? And then you mask it. You say, no, but Guruji said for me to be this, for me to be that. But when I started to, different things that were confronting me, be it Guruji, even when, as I said, when I was reading this book, it was reawakening those memories and those feelings. And I had to just sit there and go, yeah, I've had my Kumbhakarna moments. I've absolutely lived this, where you lie to yourself. Lying to others is almost like a non-factor. It's the easiest thing in the world when you're in this mindset. That's irrelevant. You don't care. If they catch you in a lie, if they don't like it, you don't care. You just don't care. But you lie to yourself to the point where you almost believe it. You almost believe that I'm doing something good with this laziness, this inertia, this whatever. Yeah. And it leads me a little bit into Indrajit, because I don't want to dive into his analysis too much, but you said that the difference with Indrajit is that his biggest weakness, in a sense, is his intelligence, because he's so skilled, he's so competent, he's so intelligent that it starts to work against him because it's not married to longing.
Yes, that's the thing.
There isn't a marriage of the intelligence to longing. I think that if I draw from that and I draw from Kumbhakarna, when you have position and esteem and experience, which Kumbhakarna has, you've lived through a lot, you've seen a lot, and you have intelligence that Indrajit has. And in both instances, when this isn't married with the actual purpose of it all, the foundation of it all, which is love for God, longing that is nurtured, that is fed, you have two demons. You end up just in a demonic situation, in a terrible situation, and you have terrible circumstances, terrible consequences.
Yeah, I mean, we talked to Swami Tulsidas in America, and I was talking to him about the nature of why the ashram, and what was the reason for your success of the ashram, right? And his immediate answer was, I always put prayer first, right? Even if there was like some, hole in the ceiling somewhere, or guests were coming, he's like, oh no, we've got to get the guests ready, maybe we'll miss prayers today. He's like, no, prayers are never missed. And his idea was that if prayer is right and we get prayer right, everything else flows from that. And what happens with the Indrajit mentality in particular is that because the intelligence is very, very strong, and I even talk about perhaps even a slight mystical realization. It's possible that you as a devotee,
it's not just mundane.
Yeah. And this, again, people might think I'm being a bit ungrounded here, but I make the point with Indrajit that you can have mystical realizations but still be incredibly childish, right? And it's not that you're perfect just because you've had a few intuitive, some kind of realizations inside of you. Insights, whatever, yeah. And but the problem is with the Indrajit mentality is that, like I said, it comes back to the seen it all before. I understand what's going on. I know what Guruji's doing. Yeah. I know where this is going. I get it all. And then when you have all of these things, even if and the thing is, there is a grain of truth there. It's not that it's wrong, but when there's no longing, suddenly you find you turn into a monster. You can turn into a monster. And that's what Indrajit does. One horrific thing he does in the Ramayana that I will talk about is he picks up, he makes an illusion of Sita, and he parades it on the battlefield. And then he kills the illusory Sita in front of Ram. And I put that down as a full-blown anti-guru stance where you turn against the master. You actively and openly turn against the master. And people say, how do people turn against the master? My answer in the book is very easily, right? Because understand one thing, the guru is taking us to somewhere, or the nature of the Atma. As long as you want to have an ego and a mind, you want to be independent. And that independence will be challenged. The very nature of bhakti is to unrealize your dependency, constitutional dependency on God, right? But your independence is going to be challenged. And if we don't keep that in check, what happens is the independence turns into resentment, right? And that's what Indrajit stands for as well. It can happen very, very easily. All devotees at some point, like I always say, there's a nuclear button on every devotee. If Guruji presses it, you're off, right? And this is why we have to be very, very careful and always keep that longing alive, because that longing keeps us humble. And I think, Indrajit is a really dangerous character.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Like I said, it was really, really thought-provoking stuff going through this, because I think that obviously different devotees will find themselves a little differently and to different extents and different characters. My situation is very unique. And I think that's one of the strengths of the book. It's just how diverse the range of characters are in the analysis that is made. We were touching on these demons. It obviously brings up Vibhishana for me. Another one of the demons, the Rakshasas. He's the brother of Ravana. And he has a very different position to all of this, a very different way of dealing with all of this. And one of the points you make in the book is you speak about echo chambers.
Yeah.
You speak about the danger of the Sangha, as well as you speak about the benefit of Sangha. You speak about both sides of the coin, but the echo chamber around Ravana and how Vibhishana rises out of this.
Yeah. Yeah, so Ravana, what the ego does, naturally, it will draw you close to people who you agree with, right? That's just in any situation, not just in a spiritual context, in any situation, you create an echo chamber. And Lanka, after Hanuman leaves and completely wrecks Lanka and sets it on fire, there's just this kind of like post-match analysis that happens in the courtroom with Ravana, and all the Rakshasas get up and say, Ravana, you defeated this Indra, you did this, you did that, you're so amazing. And Ravana's there just lapping it up, going, yeah. They're trying to boost morale because they've had a massive kicking from one Vanara, which is Hanuman. And he's created echo, and Vibhishana is the only one who stands up and says, look, I love you. This is why I'm saying this to you. Yeah. These are all snakes, undercover snakes here. They're feeding you. You know, he addresses the congregation, says, you know how vulnerable Ravana is to praise, right? And he stands up and he says, I tell you, Ram, return back Sita now. What you're doing is wrong. Ram is Supreme Lord, and so on. He goes for it. And he's vilified. Ravana turns against him. And eventually he lifts up, flies off, and then goes back to Lanka. But what Vibhishana represents is really important, is that this purpose of Sangha is we must stand for the Master, for Sri Hari at every opportunity. That is the duty of every member of the Sangha, to stand for who Guruji is. Because otherwise, you talked about friendships earlier, how Guruji was saying, be careful. Well, I'm guessing, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that he was saying don't form these cliques, whereby, and when you form a clique in a Sangha, what happens is it's just an ego job. One ego supporting another ego, festering, and the current of grace that's in the Sangha gets cut off if you're stuck in a clique. And so that's why the current of the Master has to be running throughout the Sangha. Then the Sangha itself becomes a murti of the Master himself. Right, and that's what sadhu sangha, or being satsanga, being in amongst the company of devotees, is all about. Where the current of the Master is always there, where we're constantly challenged. Your blind spot is something that someone else can point you at, and my blind spot you can point out to me. That's what sangha is about. And so Vibhishana in that moment represents that.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely correct. We had a meeting, board meeting, organizational meeting, and Guruji came to that meeting and he spoke to us. And one of the things he said was, you all cover up each other's flaws. And someone might hear that and think, well, that's a good thing. We're covering for each other's flaws. Yeah, but hold on. Covering up in the sense of, rather than helping them resolve it, helping them overcome it, you just cover it up with either it's praise or just neglect. Let's ignore this side of things. Let's just not look into that and whatever else. And there is that clique tendency, this tendency to create echo chambers everywhere you go, to create comfort zones everywhere you go. It's comfort bubbles, it's echo chambers, it's all of this. And that's what's going on in Lanka. And you're absolutely spot on in highlighting Vibhishana's role in this.
When I go to Sita, right? Sita sends Lakshmana away. So when the golden deer, when Rama's gone, That's one. When you lose the proximity of the affection of the master through desire, that's one thing. You're already on a bad footing. But if you stick with the Sangha, you can get back. Stick with the Sangha. You ask, what's the way back?
Yeah.
Stick with the Sangha. But what does Sita do?
Lakshmana.
She turns on Lakshmana. She utters
she accuses him. Yeah.
She accused him, like, you've come here because you had eyes on me. You know, it gets really nasty, right?
Yeah.
And so Lakshmana is so hurt by this, he's sent away. And then he draws the circle around the hermitage. That's the sadhana. So you have the proximity and affection of the master, the Sangha, and you have sadhana. Sita loses all three of those. And that's why she becomes vulnerable to Ravana. And that's the reason why she gets taken to Lanka, this destitute place of pleasure.
Spot on. There's some. It's not in your book because it's not. I don't think it fits the theme. But people say that the reason why Ram sends Sita through the trial of fire to prove herself is because of this moment, because she made false accusations against Lakshmana.
Yes.
So it's this idea of like, okay, yeah, that's more speaking on this idea of karma and exactly. So it's like you made accusations against the pure person that was Lakshmana. Now we'll do the same to you, basically, to understand the consequence of our actions, right?
But the really good point about Vibhishana and how he goes, and after he leaves Ravana, he sacrifices everything. He leaves everything behind. He goes to the Vanara camp. They all accuse him of being a spy, a plant. He goes to seek refuge, and they're basically all asking Ram, what should we do? And Ram's message, and this is where he utters the kind of Charma Sloka of the Ramayana, a very famous sort of thing, where he says, if even anyone just surrenders to me just once, I will always grant them refuge. And it's this huge thing that Vibhishana does. And I was giving a satsang about that, about the nature of the Charma Sloka, how it seems so easy. Guruji says a kind of Charma Sloka type thing, where he says, people just have to trust me. That's all they have to do. Krishna says, Moksha Shami Masaja, I will liberate you, have no fear. Varaha says to Bhudevi, even if they don't think about me, I'll think about them, right? And it sounds so easy. But the thing is this, to trust that, you have to be dear to the master to trust that statement. Ma suchaha, right? Do not worry. You have to be dear. You have to give yourself to the master. Once you've given yourself to the master, only then do you have the strength to actually trust that statement. Otherwise, if Guruji says trust me, but yeah, Guruji, I trust you. And then when a test comes, you don't really. Oh, I'll leave it to Guruji. Guruji knows everything. But when the test comes, we don't trust him. But when we've given ourselves to him, fully giving us, like Vibhishana sacrificed everything, no backup plan, nothing, everything on the line, all the chips on black. I don't know, is that how it works? Yeah, gambling everything on Ram. And when we gamble everything in the master without reservation, no backup plan, it's that act that gives us the strength to actually trust the Charma Sloka. And then how do you know you've given yourself? Is that when in your heart, there's no one else in your heart. I always describe it as you have to have a palace in your heart that no one else can get into. If your kids are in there, if your wife is in there, if anyone else is in there, it has to be exclusively for Guruji. That's how you know you've given yourself. And I remember once I gave a satsang, and I don't know if I upset some people. I said, if you
could have been any satsang. That's the criteria.
if you have given yourself fully, you can't fall in love with anyone. This kind of sense of I love you, I love you, I love this. When you've given yourself to Guruji and you have a palace inside of you and it's only exclusively for him, that's what it means. That's what I'm talking about, and that's what allows you to trust his promise.
You mentioned tests a couple of times there. I remember it immediately made me think. I was reading the writings of a very prominent Vaishnava scholar, guru, which will remain nameless for diplomatic purposes. And he said something along the lines of, if you have a true guru, he'll never test you. Yeah, there are no tests. This testing business is the talk of false gurus or fake gurus, right? They talk about tests because it's an excuse to excuse their bad behavior, to excuse whatever else, right? And I read it, and again, I understood the logic. I saw what they were trying to get at, but I just laughed internally to myself. I was like, I believe the tests are almost the hallmark of the true guru. It's the most common and important thing. And talking of tests, the trial by fire, right? Sita comes back. There's this beautiful culmination of the whole thing. He's rescued her from Lanka, and yet something feels off, right? And she's immediately put through this trial by fire. And you characterize it in a very strong way. And you do make this point throughout the book that some spiritual truths are paradoxical.
Yeah.
Right? And we will touch a bit more on that, I think, in the Revatikaanta, which I think we'll leave till the end of this conversation. But this idea that when God denies you or rejects you, it's the golden opportunity for you to rise up and claim your birthright.
Yes.
Is the point you make.
Yeah.
What do you mean by this birthright?
So you have to be careful with this because in one sense, we are the humble servant, a speck, nothing, a bit of dust, and we're here just to serve. But you hear this in Guruji's satsangs where he sometimes says, it's your birthright. He's made that statement a number of times. You should claim that, right? And this is what happens with Sita, right? She is there, and you think it's going to be like this great reunion of Rama and Sita, but then Ram goes very cold, he becomes very stern, and he makes her prove her purity by going through the fire. And immediately Sita's reaction is almost, how dare you? Right? I thought about nobody else, or how is that possible that you can just sit there stone faced and allow me to go into the fire and so on. But Ram doesn't budge. And it's this kind of, Krishna's the same thing with the gopis, where he says in the Raslila night, go back to your husbands.
Yeah.
Go back to your husbands. And they're like, we've given everything to you. How can you say that? Right? When you have given everything to the Guru, and this comes back to the Vibhishana point I was just making earlier about the Charma Sloka, is that when you have given everything, then you have the ability to claim your birthright. If you claim from the mind, it's arrogance. It's just arrogance. It's just almost stupidity, right? But when you claim from the heart, it rises up but as a surge, naturally, spontaneously, because the heart is the mouthpiece of the Atma. And then when that comes up, you say, no, I belong to you. It's my birthright. My position is next to you. And I believe Rama does that, Lord Ram does that to Sita so that she can assert herself, so that what's latent inside of her can rise up and manifest. And she herself can know that she belongs to Ram, right? And that's what the whole point of the tests are, is that the test is to make what is latent manifest. I love Guruji, do you? Maybe you do, right? And then through the test, you will know that you do, right? And it will no longer be this potentiality, it'll be an actuality, right? And that's the point of test, to rise up to a whole nother level. Like, for example, my brother, he was living in London, everyone knows his story, I think, had a nice, comfortable life, this, that, and the other. Guruji just clicks his finger and says, you should move to Germany, right? And then if you say, Guruji's my everything, well, Guruji's not, or at least Guruji's number one, you have to move to Germany. And say it was a tough decision initially, but then he's only just realized, no, Guruji is number one, so I have to move to Germany. It's a simple thing. And then the move to Germany makes him number one. So it's no longer just a statement inside of yourself that you tell yourself in your prayer or to devotees, yeah, Guruji's number one. Oh, of course Guruji's number one. No, he is number one. You've demonstrated it.
Yeah, it's not a hypothetical truth, it's now manifest.
And that's what the tests are about, demonstrating the reality that's in your heart, making it manifest.
It's very true. I think there's a lot of things that, there's the cheap sort of saying that, it's easy to give lip service, but of course when it comes time to actually do it, something else. But that's almost to highlight that there's a sort of hypocrisy where people claim one thing but actually don't really believe it. This isn't what's going on here. This is more that you may very well have the love, you may very well have the surrender, you may very well have these things, but as an intention, as a sort of mind state, but it's not proven, it's not necessary, it's not been required. And so you almost need the situation that makes it necessary, that makes it required to actually live it. Otherwise, it's almost like we've gone to the gym, you've developed all the skills, you're strong, you've got all the weapon skills, but you never go to war.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah.
Which is not to say that that's an absolute must at all times. Everything has its timing, but there is an element to it that it's all for nothing unless it comes to some effect, to some use, right? And I think the tests, even the separation sometimes, the negative stuff, quote unquote, because it is something that I've observed throughout all my sort of analysis of religious life across even traditions, that the saintly persons always seem to suffer. There always seems to be a landmark, hallmark test or suffering or adversity that hits them at some point of their devotional life. And it's not always at the beginning, this is what kicked off my devotional journey. Often it's at the peak, right? And it often strikes me as a necessity. It's not actually an accident. It's not actually a random thing. It's by design. By design, you will be tested through that fire.
What tests also do is, and it happened to my brother as well, is that when you make these big, bold decisions to put him first or manifest that, you leave behind old baggage. It forces you to leave behind old baggage. And suddenly all the excess stuff that's been holding you back is dropped because you end up manifesting something that's latent inside of you, as I said, and it becomes actualized. And when it becomes actualized, it becomes this thing that kind of gets rid of all the fluff that you've been hanging on to as well. And it really refines your life. And this is the thing that when we talk about tests, Guruji tweeted about this not so long ago, actually quite some time ago, where he basically said, you should. It's painful almost for the Sadguru to hear that it's a test, right?
Yeah.
If you remember that tweet where he's like, we shouldn't even be calling it a test. It's actually a form of grace where he's basically compelling us to bring out what's within and manifest it.
It is semantic in that sense, because obviously I still continue to call it a test.
Yeah.
I 100% agree with what he said. Do you know what it is as well? I feel like with these tests, with these acts of grace from the Guru, I had a parallel experience because I moved a lot when I was younger. I kept moving house. And I saw that the necessity of moving means you have to drop things. You cannot carry everything with you. And it's almost like a forced way that life makes you detach, makes you simplify, makes you focus, right? Right now, I'm going to go through something similar again. So Guruji has asked me to relocate. I'll be leaving Germany, moving to the United States. And I looked at my room the day he told me, and I just got in there and I sort of looked around and I thought, how many of these things can I even bring with me as a sannyas? Not even as someone who's hoarding or who has a whole house and business and cars and whatever. Just my books, my clothes, my whatever. Even then you just go, well, I guess I'll just take what I need.
Yeah.
And you end up with, again, much less than what you actually have. And I think there's a lot of softer and tougher ways that this process of recalibrating and refocusing and sort of simplifying.
But it catapults you to a whole different level of relationship.
I agree.
When you go through, like, even your big move, I've not for me to say as such, but I can imagine any kind of big shift like that will catapult you into a different situation with Guruji.
You separate the wheat from the chaff. It's you either rise to the occasion or you sink.
Yeah.
It's true of any of these situations, right?
And if you rise, and like I said, this is where it comes back to the Dasarada thing that we talked about, that the current is always pushing you up, and closer and dearer and more intimate with the Guru and with Sri Hari. That's the trajectory. It's always going like, if you just get on board, the trajectory will take you towards that. But if we dig our heels in, all the rest of it, that's when it becomes a problem.
If you'll allow me, actually, now listening to this, I want to do something to wrap up this episode, which is I want to do two things. I want to first talk about Uttarakhanda and then go to Hanuman last, because we haven't really touched on Hanuman all that much. The reason being is because I think the Uttarakhanda fits perfectly with what we're discussing right now. It's almost like this paradoxical shock to the system, the not happy ending of the Ramayana in a sense, right? So I want to unpack that, but then I want to leave Hanuman till the end, because Hanuman, there's something beautiful you highlight in your book, which is this idea that he wasn't always the hero we know. Right. In the beginning, a lot of that was latent, right? Dormant. And so then how it then becomes manifest is, I think, something that is very relatable, and the audience needs to hear this, because a lot of people might be listening to this conversation thinking, I'm not there. I'm not at all these things that you're describing. I don't have my guru yet. I don't have this relationship. I haven't reached all of these different characters, dilemmas and challenges and whatever else. And I think one of the beautiful things that Hanuman brings to the table, and again, we'll unpack it in just a bit, is this idea that keep collecting all these blessings and skills and opportunities. You'll eventually be able to put them all into the service of Guru and God.
Yeah.
I'll park it there for now. Let's reopen it in a second. Uttarakhanda. I want to read something from a passage from your book on the Uttarakhanda, the last section of the Ramayana. The whole epic is driven towards the union of Rama and Sita. It is a poetic treatise in devotional surrender and service, a love story of the soul and God. It's a dramatic exposition of how the master will strive to recover what finally belongs to him. The Uttarakhanda seems to dismantle this. We have built a certain understanding that we will never be abandoned, never forsaken, and eternally protected. And in just a few scenes, everything appears to be undone.
Yeah.
Why?
Right. So, I mean, the Uttarakhanda is explained. Understand that I'm taking it to a spiritual, sort of metaphysical understanding of the Uttarakhanda, not why did Ram do this? He's a king, Dharma, and so on. I'm not wading into that. No, the Sadguru is one. This is why he's the Sadguru. The Sadguru is one who can build narratives and destroy them at the same time. Right? It's phenomenal to watch Guruji in operation. He will build a narrative that we all follow and go, yes, the mission is going this way, or we're going that way, and this is my path, and Guruji's going to do this and Guruji's going to do that, and at the same time he'll be smashing it at the same time. Right? He'll bring it down to ground zero. I remember, I was saying this in a satsang recently, back in 2005, 2008, you were there as well, right? How ungrounded were we in those days? We were obscene, we were embarrassing. Right? We were making all kinds of outlandish statements. We were just superficial and shallow, like, as you could possibly be. And Guruji fed the narrative to a degree, because it needed to be exhausted out of us, right? And then he built the narrative, and then he just collapsed the whole thing, right? And this is what the Sadguru does. We have built many narratives, and the danger of especially the end of the Yuddhakand is that, the great coronation. Ram is with Sita, happy ending, Vashishta is coronating him, it's amazing, and so on. Trumpets, conches are blowing and everything else. And isn't that beautiful? Yeah, so when I get to Vaikuntha one day, I'll do this. And obviously it's not quite as often like that, but it's something like that. We carry that subliminally, right? This idea of a happy ending. And the Uttarakhanda smashes that. Because what's happening? Sita's over here. She gets swallowed up by the earth. Ram is lamenting. Sita's lamenting. Love and Kush are there, and it's just like, it's crazy, right? It's crazy. It's a huge break from the end of the Yuddhakand. So much so that Tulsidas doesn't even write it in a Ramacharita. He leaves it out, right, for that reason. But this is an end of a narrative. It's the breaking of a narrative, and when you're left destitute when you read that, unless you have really understood the secrets of the Ramayana, right? If you've taken it superficially as just a superficial narrative, you fall off a cliff at the Uttarakhanda. However, if you go deeper and deeper and imbibe the inner, what Bharata does, he takes the Padakas into his heart and serves the Padakas. He knows who Rama is. He's realizing who Rama is. He reaches that Sarupya that we talk about with Bharata, right? And then once you reach that stage, the Uttarakhanda, yes, Ram vanishes in the narrative sense, but he explodes in the inner world.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's the difference.
I absolutely wanted to highlight that point. Fantastic that you made it. I think that one of the most misunderstood things of a relationship with an external physical guru is that, as you said, narrative building. It's the feeling that you want to have the proof of all of the relationship that you're building manifest externally. And it can't. It never can. It never can to the extent you want it, because there's competing realities trying to manifest in one common space, and it doesn't work. If everyone wants to be the one and only, you can't have all of you be the one and only at the same time. Of course, you have the Krishna situation where every wife had a palace with a Krishna in Dwarka. The Ras Leela, every gopi had a Krishna to dance with. But that, you can take it literally, no problem, but you can also take it metaphorically, that there is in the inner realm, in the inner world, a Krishna for everyone to have fully and to be enjoyed fully, without any sharing, without any prying eyes, without anything of the sort. And I think with the spiritual master, it's often the same. A lot of people create this narrative in their head. I'm going through this suffering because eventually we're going to end up like this and like that. But they manifest this desire on the outside reality. It has to happen here and now, out here. And as I said, because it never does, for a lot of people, it's just shocking.
Yeah.
Like, I've served in this ashram for X amount of years and now Guruji is sending me away.
Yeah.
How is this the end of my story here?
Yeah. This wasn't the happy ending.
Yeah, the trials and tribulations, I put up with this and that and so many processes and so many challenges, and I overcame them all only to leave.
Yeah.
And I think it's just a complete miscreation, misconstruct of what it's supposed to be, because if you listen carefully from the beginning, he's always said, it starts in here.
Yeah.
In here is where that explosion, as you said, is going to happen. And then it may eventually bleed over into the outside, but in a way that you don't expect, in a way we have no reference to.
Yeah,
right?
If your mind is fulfilled and your expectations are fulfilled, something's gone wrong. The Sadguru is not going to fulfill your expectations. Yeah. He's not going to fulfill what your mind's fantasies. As if he does, he's just feeding the ego. And if you're feeding the ego, where's the spiritual progress? Where's the genuine love? Where's the surrender? It's not going to happen. He's going to come and he's just going to blow up the whole house, right? That's what Valmiki does at the end, right? He's going to blow up the whole situation, and then through that, he will liberate you into something else that the mind cannot even touch.
And I think when you point out that, for example, Tushita doesn't mention it in Ramcharitmanas, most people who tell the Ramayana don't talk about the ending. They purposely want to avoid it. I've gone to countless satsangs where there'll always be someone, usually a Mataji, that will raise their hand and ask, but what do you think about Ram exiling his wife and whatever else, right?
The feminist thing.
Yeah, it always goes, like either it's ignored, pretending it's not there, or when it's addressed in a critical way. When I actually think it's one of the most magical, necessary parts of the Ramayana story.
Magical, yeah, I agree, 100%.
To understand this isn't a Disney fairy tale.
No.
Is one of the most profound understandings you will have on your
He's
spiritual journey.
Achintya Adokshaja, the one who defeats the senses. And as long as your senses are fulfilled, they're not being defeated. If your senses are being fulfilled, you go to Lanka for that, right?
Yeah.
You don't go to Ayodhya for that.
But what would you say to someone who sort of pushes back on that and says, but if I can have the expectation of no narrative being fulfilled, what are we even doing here? Like, where's the love that's going to come as a result of everything that I'm doing? Surely there's an aim, there's an ambition here, there's a goal.
Sure. And this is the thing. This is why even with the Siddhanta series that we did, Siddhanta is very important. Narrative is very important. Everything is very important.
Framework.
All of this stuff is very, we need something, a path to plow and go deep in. But we have to, at some point, that Uttarakhanda is going to come. Right? At some point, that Uttarakhanda is going to... And if we haven't embellished and gone deep and sincerely and found the jewels of the narrative, then when that Uttarakhanda comes, we will not be ready. Right? And when we're not be ready, then we'll look around and go, oh, Ram's gone. It's a mess. I don't know what's going on. But if you have imbibed everything properly, the path, the narrative, and this Siddhanta, all this stuff properly, not just in a dogmatic, arrogant level at the mind, but deep within your heart, and follow Guruji's instruction properly with humbleness and sincerity, with real longing, as we said, then when the Uttarakhanda comes, it'll be an explosion to another realm.
I think that was what I was about to say. With the very beginning of our discussion today, you highlighted that this is about going to accessing a transcendent dimension of where the Leela is happening. And I think part of that is that as you access that transcendent Leela, naturally, you're letting go of the mundane Leela. You're letting go of the mundane appearance of things, because Sita being swallowed up by the earth is just a mundane appearance of something. Do we actually believe that Lakshmi has now been eternally separated from Narayana? It's like, no. But in the mundane Leela here, almost yes. In the physical, yes, but not in the spiritual, right? And I think there has to be a level of acceptance that is a constant underlying theme of all of this. This too shall pass. Right? This idea of the material.
But I'm glad you raised that point about what's the point of the narrative. Then is the narrative just something you just throw aside? No, it's very, very, very important. Very, very important. Critical. It's the whole thing. It's the whole path. But the Uttarakhand takes you somewhere else. But only if we have really dived deep into the narrative before that.
Love it. So as I said, if someone's not ready for all of this, they haven't yet. I mean, they're listening to this thinking, great, but I'm just in a different life circumstance right now. Hanuman, right? So when the Vanaras come to make the bridge to go to Lanka, they're trying to cross over. They're discussing amongst themselves, as you said in the book, who up among us can do this, right? And Jambavan awakens Hanuman's latent reality, his dormant reality inside of him. You point this out as being Hanuman had, because of different misdeeds or curses or whatever it may be, had this reality lying dormant inside of him. What's the parallel that you see there to humans, to devotees, to us?
The parallel is simply this: you are born for a divine purpose. You are born to do something magical and transcendent. And what I mean by that, I'm not saying you're going to be on TV and you're going to be on like a TikTok star or anything like that.
Have a podcast.
Yeah, so you're obviously doing it. No, it's look at Shabari. Right? She broke boundaries. Why? Through the simplicity of her interaction with Ram, she biting the berries, tasting them herself, and then offering to Ram. She broke boundaries, right? Jatayu broke boundaries. They left a mark on Ram's heart that no one else left. And so I'm not talking about just being famous, but what I'm saying is that every single person has the potentiality for a divine purpose to leave their mark on this world. I don't believe people are just born just for the hell of it, just to go through them, just because of karma, right? I know we can get locked into that. Oh, I'm just living out my karma or whatever, this, that, and the other. No, I have far more faith in the human existence and the potentiality of each individual person, whether you're a devotee or not, that you have something magical to give to the world. And Hanuman embodies that. He received all these blessings, like you said, and it's all dormant. When the time comes, and Guruji said this once to me, he said, it's all about time. He said, we're all restless, like hounds, bloodthirsty hounds, right? But he's like, no, time. There is a time. When the time is right, that potentiality will just explode beyond comparison. And that's what, when Jambavan almost initiates him in some way, you call it initiation, where Hanuman suddenly realizes he's not just a servant of Sugriva, he is the servant of Lord Rama. And he's going to achieve something phenomenal. And you see him, he grows and he shouts and he flies across the ocean and he achieves feats that break all boundaries. It breaks all boundaries. He sets Lanka on fire. He shows at every level he's sensitive to Sita. He argues, debates with Ravana. At every level he's breaking boundaries. He brings the mountains for the Sanjeevani herb, where he finds a way. And this is the thing: those blessings, if we are constantly vigilant, doing what we should be doing, not missing chances, then they accumulate, like you said. And then it's about the grace, unlocking what we need at the right time, and the whole thing just like a dam that bursts. That's what I look at Hanuman. And I look at Hanuman, when I was writing it, I just felt so pumped. I have to say, there can be nothing greater than living the dharma of your soul and glorifying your guru and God. There can be nothing greater than that. And that's what Hanuman does. He's the anti-Kumbhakarna, right? He's the absolute anti-Kumbhakarna, longing manifested in action and achievement.
You're right. And I think one of the things is of course, divine timing, as we were saying, like patience. You got to have, everything comes in divine timing, but not to wait idly. So a lot of people who are listening to this, as I said, I think the message I personally wanted to leave with them is, your divine timing may not have arrived yet. You're still somehow unfolding to that purpose. That purpose is going to arrive into your manifest life. Let's put it like this. But in the meanwhile, there's plenty you can be doing. Like, you can be more Hanuman-like than Kumbhakarna-like, right? In the sense that you can be developing, you can be accumulating skills, capacities, capabilities, making sure that those doors are open to you. Because once it kicks into gear, you can put everything you've amassed into that service. And I think a lot of people make a very harsh cut. Like, oh, now I'm spiritual. Now I've adopted my spiritual identity in my spiritual life. And you almost want to turn away from everything you were or everything you've been to now just develop something new. And I actually think that that's not always productive. I think a lot of people should use their upbringing and their skills and their material life to somehow find a way, Bharata style, find a way to make all of that become productive in the service of the Lord. Like, don't turn away from that. Conscious
of time, but I'll just probably end with this situation where the Bala Kanda, go back to the very first Kanda, Dasaratha performs the yagna. He's performing, it's a material, mundane yagna, to get his children. At the same time, the Devas are appealing to the Lord to come down. There are two realities at play. We may not be aware of that reality, and that's why I say every single person, I think, has a transcendent reality, operational as well as the mundane reality. And Dasaratha, it has a sneak peek of that, and then the whole Ramayana unfolds what was actually going on in the first.
I mean, you're famous somehow for doing this. You always point out the cosmic consequences to everything.
Yes,
and I think it's a good point. I think because
there's a conspiracy going on between your soul and God. There's a conspiracy, and the mind doesn't understand it.
That is true. There's one conspiracy we can get behind, and it's that one. Awesome. Well, I have to say, this is a really, I genuinely believe it's a phenomenal book. I had a great time reading this, leading up to this podcast. I think by the time this podcast airs, around February, the book might be coming out.
Yeah.
About that time, where will people be able to get it? Bhakti Shop and
Bhakti Shop,
online?
Maybe it's through Bhakti Marga.
Okay,
so
right.
I deliberately did it through Bhakti Marga.
Awesome. So I highly, highly recommend it. One of the best books I've read in a long time. Maybe since Avatars of the Master. But great book. And I think it was, it's really practical. It's incredibly grounded. It's incredibly real. And like you said, not only for people who do have masters, although of course there will be some elements of it, some gems that won't resonate as much unless you are walking this path. But I think it's only right that you did position it that way. So congratulations, Mayuran. It's a great book.
Thank you.
I hope you'll get to read it very soon. Jai Gurudev.
Jai Gurudev.